Hello, and welcome to another episode of the LifeSprings International Podcast. LifeSprings is a global network whose mission is to connect, encourage, and prepare women worldwide to impact their communities with the love of Jesus. I'm your host, Britt Santos, and I'm excited to share more stories of God working through women across the world. We believe faith formation and carrying out the work of being Jesus' hands and feet should be done in community. And my guest today happens to know a lot about that, especially in the context of the global community. My interview today with Mathilde is part 3 of our series on prayers of preparation. Today's prayer is for wisdom. As a reminder, when we say prayers of preparation, we're talking about the 6 specific things that we pray for in our faith communities that we believe prepare and empower us to effectively answer the unique work that God has given each of us. Now, everyone in the LifeSprings community and every one of our LifeSprings partners has demonstrated godly wisdom in their life, and all of them could tell us incredible stories. So picking just one person for this was pretty tough. But Mathilde and her husband have been serving as missionaries in open and closed countries for decades, leading as the European directors for the International Teams Mission Organization. Mathilde has done this all while raising her 4 children, leading mentorship and training programs, serving in human trafficking interventions, and recently battling cancer. And she'll tell you that her prayer life is what has enabled her to do all this. So I hope that you all are as inspired by her story as I have been. I am here today with my friend Mathilde Companjen. Did I say it okay? Okay. Mathilde is part of our LifeSprings community, and she brings a vast knowledge and experience in missions, and particularly going into closed countries. We are talking today about another prayer posture, which is praying for wisdom. And this was a really hard one to figure out who I'm going to ask to interview this, because I'm pretty sure anyone who knows our group or any of the women in our LifeSprings network would say all of them really exhibited spiritual wisdom. And so how could we pick just one? But Mathilde, I know that you have an amazing story and the story keeps going. And so don't feel any pressure with that, like to be like, you are the wisest among us, but you're pretty wise. And I think you are able to really help explain what's the difference between working out of that worldly wisdom and working out of the wisdom that we're praying for in community. Yeah. Hi, Mathilde.
Hi, Brittany. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. Well, I will let you take it away. Can you introduce us a little more to yourself and your family, what you're doing right now, and then we'll talk more about your story and what you did before that.
Well, I'm married to Bart for 50 years. We just celebrated that in December. Something to be really thankful for. We have 4 beautiful daughters between 38 and 45 years old, all having a husband. And we have 4 grandchildren. Well, I'm raised in a Christian family. I've been a Christian my whole life, so to speak. I made my own choice when I was 12, and I always said I want to be a missionary. I'm the youngest of 8 kids. My mom said, well, then it's wise to become a nurse because that's very helpful on the mission field.
Sure.
Okay. So I became indeed a nurse, and I did a teacher's training as well. So I became a teacher for nurses. We lived in The Hague. That's the city where the government is. And we were highly involved, Bart and I, in church work. We did everything from kids work to music was my thing, music, worship leading. We had a house of our own, a car in front of the door. Bart was working for the government. I had this beautiful job of teaching nurses and doctors. And then we felt like, Lord, is this all there is? Or is there something more? And somebody suggested us, if you don't know what to do in life, take a month of prayer for the next step. So not for your whole future, but just for the next step. And that can be learning a language or getting a warm feeling for a certain country or whatsoever. And we decided to do that. That were not very long hours of prayer, but just every day, Lord, what is our next step? I never forget that last evening. We hadn't just said yet amen when the phone rang. And we thought, can we interrupt God in answering the phone? But we did. And it was the pastor of our church. He said, we got a phone call from Brother Andrew from Open Doors. That's an organization that's working behind the Iron Curtain, closed countries. And they want to do their very first prayer trip into Albania. Now we are talking the year 1982. And they need one more couple because Albania was very strict about the number of tourists that would enter the country. He said, and we've been praying as a team tonight, and we felt that we should ask you guys. And we felt, oh, that's it. And we also realized by the power of that month of prayer, it's not just the trip. We knew from beginning, and that trip completely changed our life. We felt like Albania is going to be God's plan for us, whatever and however, because nothing indicated that Albania would open up yet. But when the wall fell in Berlin, Bart said, let's get ready. Let's get ready. So we had an early dedication in church. We had 4 little kids between 2 and 11. And we had a meeting in Vienna with lots of other missions. In the end, Albania opened up.
Hilda, when you say open up, are you referring to like when a country is closed to missionaries?
Well, Albania was under communism for 40 years. No religion was allowed. They had changed all the churches in sport halls, in city centers. If you would have discovered with the Bible, you would get 14 years imprisonment. So
And this is where you guys were headed.
Yes. But at the time, they allowed people. So they even allowed us to bring Bibles. That was official. And so what Bart and I did, completely unexperienced, was setting up the very first evangelical outreach in the football stadium in Tirana. I never forget that part. To come in a country where there are no cars, only a few governmental cars, no food, walking people with their geese and their goats from home to the field, and then to organize something. You could not make any announcement because it had to go from mouth to mouth. And so we invited missionaries from Kosovo because they spoke Albanian. We had a whole team. We sent faxes out, and we had 130 people that said, we can come and help. We can pray. We've been praying until now. So Bart and I were basically the coordinators of this whole event. And I had to make noise with my 4 kids in the building where we were because the Albanians were climbing over the walls because they saw cars. What's that? And they wanted to steal. So I had to make noise with the kids. But that was the start of bringing God back to Albania. We have asked 2 of the Kosovan missionaries to stay and to be leaders of the very first 2 churches. I think we baptized 110 people that week. So everybody wanted to know, who is this Jesus that we were not allowed to read about? What's this book? There was such a hunger.
I have so many questions. Do you think the fact that it wasn't allowed and having a Bible could come with 14 years in prison, did that in any way prime people to that much more be curious about this? And like for me, I would think, wow, whatever this news is, they don't want us to have it. So it must be quite powerful. Is that part of that hunger that you sensed? Or was it just, I mean, Jesus was so different than what they had experienced.
Definitely. They didn't know anything about God. It was silence for 40 years. So we started from creation. God is the creator from heaven. By the way, we discovered 5 believers in the south part. One of them had a Romanian Bible that he had hid under his roof. And he came together with the other believers, but their families didn't know that they were Christians and reading the Bible. So much fear was there. So yeah, definitely that was part of the hunger. So that was the start, and we realized we can't live in Albania. There's no infrastructure, no airport, no cars, no food.
How old were your kids at the time that you're doing?
Between 2 and 11.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
And we said, if we want to help missionaries come, or anyone who wants to come and help Albania, we need to move across the border to Greece and find a place close to Thessaloniki, which we did. So from Thessaloniki to Tirana, we drove every week 13 hours. That's different now. Because there was no highway, there was all these mountain crosses and scary people walking everywhere. Just to visit the new believers on the road, and we opened 25 mailboxes in Thessaloniki for missionaries so they can send their mail to Greece, and we would bring it in the country. And they could order food with us, and we would bring it in. And that's what we did for 8 years, I think.
Wow.
We had set up from day one an office in Tirana. We called it the Albanian Encouragement Project, and that became the meeting point for new missionaries to ask, where can I go? Where is nobody yet? How do I this? We became also the office for the government, a voice to the government for visas and stuff like that. So if I look back, I sometimes think, how did I dare to do that? How did we? All the pictures are energy. And it's been hard work, but God has been so faithful, really.
I mean, that was my question, is how did you dare to, like, I imagine there was some fear eh, going through this, or was the fact that Albania was opened at that point, you just didn't feel scary anymore?
We
I
have
will say, going into this, my history around the fall of the Berlin Wall is rusty. It happened before I was born. But I'm just catching up with you on social climate around all of this. And I can imagine, even though there was a hunger for Christianity, there must have still been a bit of resistance.
not in Albania. It turned around like this, and people were only hungry. And so what I remember, I have never felt fear at all. That came later. We set up a guest house. That was my part. It's funny, Bart and I are so different. Bart is the thinker. He's the researcher. I'm the doer. I'm practical. But we've decided from day one, we always will work together. It's our mission that God gave us. So we always work in connection, but in our own skills. We've seen often that that's not always the case. So, the hospitality house was my thing. So missionaries came out and they had a shower or they had a visit to the hospital. They had to repair their cars because there were no garages in Albania and no new tires, and the roads were bad. So you can imagine my language was tires in Greek and medical stuff in Greek. And that was so funny. That's where my medical part came in. So I connected with the only Christian hospital in Thessaloniki, and I decided to be a kind of interim medical person. If people wanted to come, they came via us, and I took them to the hospital. I translated. I stayed sometimes in the surgery room because nurses there don't take care of the people, but so we did.
Your mom was right. Being a nurse
Yeah,
helped with being a
absolutely.
missionary.
Yes, and I found a lot of favor in the eyes of the director of the hospital. So to jump, years later, my oldest daughter, Yoni, her husband, Edward, and their 3 kids moved to Albania as missionaries sent out by our organization, International Teams. And my daughter is a nurse, and so she started to bring in Albanians that needed medical help instead of the missionaries. So the director smiled. He said, "You walk in the footstep of your mom." Yes, she did.
Just quickly, what is it like today for missionaries in Albania? It sounds like God had a plan for your whole family that was going to span generations. So I'm curious today what that work looks like.
There have many missionaries have come to Albania because it was really those years, early 90s, was everybody had been praying for Albania. Church has been growing, but with Christianity, all the other religions came in as well. So it is harder now. People are not that hungry anymore. Many have left the country, which was really sad. Also, the new believers left. And that's why my husband said, we want the new believers to raise them, to disciple them, to train them. So let's set up a Bible school so we can keep them, because we need them to spread the gospel in their own language, their own culture.
So at the beginning of your story, you mentioned being in connection with Brother Andrew. For those who don't know who he is or don't know anything about Open Doors, can you give us a little bit of background about what life looked like for you guys to be involved in that?
Yes. Brother Andrew became known because he traveled by his little car to Russia. And Russia was a closed country at that time. And he was a Bible smuggler. So he smuggled Bibles, and that became Open Doors because he really believed there are no closed doors. God can always open doors. He's been an amazing example of faith, and he was courageous. He had no fear. He would always say to us, if you're going to fly, always pray for the person next to you. You never know if you have an opportunity to bring the gospel to that person. So we worked with him from 1985 till Albania opened up. And Open Doors only works in closed countries. So we had to close that chapter. We did ask him to preach on that very first outreach, which he did. So with that, we finished up with Brother Andrew, but his kids moved out at the same time and they became my neighbors. So I became kind of part of their family. And that's why the last 2 years of his life, I've been one of his caretakers. And that was really special to me, for this special person to care for him.
Yeah, and we had said just when I was talking to you earlier about your story and connecting all the dots of these experiences that you had, that was almost a part that we don't hear enough about, the way that women support their families and their friends, even like end of life care, or you care for your spouse when he's in the mission field and you're also thinking about keeping your kids safe.
Bart was the one who would go into the closed countries to figure out where is the need for Bibles, who wants to receive them, what is the best way to do it. He would come back, find a team, would train the team, send them out, and then he would debrief them as they came back and then go back. So you can imagine he knew the most secrets. So if they would get him, that would be really scary. So he changed his last name, not to be too familiar. I was home and he was not allowed to call me because then he could be traced. It's been interesting. I had 4 little kids, but I've been able to raise them myself. I never had any problem with to keep them, as I heard other mothers had problems with their kids. Anyway, it's been a special time to be supportive. And I was at the prayer meetings, of course, and I was allowed to do one trip every year. Yeah.
I'm sure there was something supernatural happening inside you when you say there was no fear and we were just really confident. And I've definitely experienced the Holy Spirit's work in that way. But I mean, maybe another reason why Albania didn't feel as scary is because it was open, but it sounds like this experience that you and Bart had in closed countries, especially by comparison, that sounds a lot scarier. So what is that like for you, seeing your husband leave, knowing he's going into these places where he can be imprisoned or worse for having a Bible, and you're at home with the kids and yeah, your children would have known that he had to change his name, I'm assuming?
My kids actually learned in school that they had to answer the phone with their first name and their last name, but we couldn't do that. So we had to tell them that it only could be that was our tradition, to do only your first name, and we didn't explain anything else. And I'm sure they didn't realize a lot of what was going on. They knew that he was traveling and that he was good, and that was it. And the team was always very strong in support for prayer because we couldn't talk about it. I couldn't tell other people what he was doing and where he was going. So
How did you find community in that time?
I started a house group in my house with young people, and I don't need to explain to them what Bart was doing, but they knew Open Doors. So they were my community, and I'm still in touch with many of them. And it's been for them also a journey into mission for some of them.
I can imagine I'm a young Christian and I'm considering being a missionary. If you were mentoring me, you'd probably be very honest about the things you're going to encounter and the cost of this. And I'm thinking about, or I guess I'm contrasting that to what I would have learned about as a teenager. My experience is a little bit different because my first youth group was the first time I'd ever attended a church. I didn't grow up going to church, and so I came to Christianity as a older teen, young adult. And so one of my first experiences was joining a youth group and the youth pastor saying, "How would you like to come to Mexico with us on a missions trip?" And at that point, I didn't believe in Jesus. There was a lot of hard things happening in my life, and he just thought, "Get in the van. We're going to get to know you and we're going to take care of you, and you're going to get a break from some of the hard things that you're going through." But that being said, I know that my introduction to short-term or even long-term missions is very different. But I think I can say that for a lot of North American youth group teens, the picture that we get of missions and the reality of the hardship would maybe it'd be an easier sell than kind of the things that you're talking about. Yeah. So with that being said, what does mentorship look like for you at that time where you have these young adults and you're like, "Hey, this is what you're signing up for, but God's going to take care of you. Get ready for it."
Yeah, it had many colors. It had many colors. This was more, how do you live life? And there was a lot of brokenness at that time. Also in the group, there was a girl who was molested by family members. So I've walked with her for years to go through the trauma. Some of Brother Andrew's children were in my group, so that was easier than to talk with because they knew more than the rest. And the funny thing is, we never did any Bible college ourselves. Our church had no vision for mission at that time before we left. So now international teams has member care. They take care of the missionaries. We had nothing. We just went. Another thing is the financial part, right? You need to have financial support from people. We have never had shortage of money, never. We had never a lot of money. I still remember one evening Bart was counting and he said, "Oh, Mathilde, we miss 1,000 guilders." That was about $500. The phone rang and somebody said, "I was just wondering, how are your finances?" I said, "Have you been listening in from the Netherlands here into Greece?" He said, "What?" I said, "Bart is just saying that we are missing $500. He says, "I'll put it on your account." And that's beautiful. I'm so in awe as I look back over God's faithfulness. And my link to LifeSprings was the lady in France that started the breakfasts. That was a friend of mine. Her husband worked with us. I went to the first retreat weekend in Lyon, I believe. And Janice Gutierrez, she was the leader at that time. She challenged me to do a workshop. I said, "Me? A workshop? I don't know." And she said, "Think about it." And I had just done a course on grief and losses. So I did the first one, which was really good. And then the next weekend, I did a workshop on women and secrets. That was an interesting one because everybody has a secret or a family secret. So I did a lot of listening that weekend to all the secrets because if you talk about it, the power goes away from the secret. And then one was on women and anger. So many women are angry. I even talked with a lady at the bus stop and she said, "I'm angry too." I didn't even know her and she started to talk about her anger. It's been really a challenge, but if you talk about wisdom, I really sensed every time God said, "You can do it," and this is the subject. And I felt this, I need to deliver this. I need to deliver this. So
Tell me more about that. One, not just praying on your own, but at the beginning of your story, you said this is something that your husband and you were praying for together, feeling like God's calling us to something else. And then along the ways, you're praying, and I'm hearing you say that you maybe received confirmation from God that this is what He's doing. How would you explain that to someone? The difference between, I guess, in a worldly sense, thinking I need to be very wise about what I'm about to step into, or even moving my family to another country. I need to be very wise about the fact that I'm financially dependent on mission supporters, comparing that to receiving wisdom from God. Because I think that's the thing that feels a bit tricky. I think I can be wise and I can discipline myself more to emulate Christ-likeness. And with that is going to be the maturity to enter into things wisely. And then there are things that you pray about and you're like, listen, this is going to sound crazy to you guys or, to some friends. And yet this is what I sense God's telling me to do, or even you look back and you're like, okay, now I can see why, through the perspective of what God was doing, how that was really wise. Did you always feel like you knew at the time that that's what was happening, or is there a way that you would mentor someone younger to say, this is how you can kind of figure out when it's different?
Well, that first experience, that was so clear. We've done it one more time at least. And that's when we transferred to international teams, the mission organization that we became leaders on. But I do believe, I believe in the cross, in the sense that it is my communication with God and Bart's communication with God, but also the communication with people. What do you think? Is this wise? Do you have any advice for me? I see many people that just make a decision like this and then it doesn't work out, or they regret, or it was the wrong. It sometimes needs time. I'm just working with a young couple, and I've just suggested them to take a month of prayer for their next step in life and to have patience, to wait for God. And sometimes the answer doesn't come clear. There's more time needed, maybe God wants to enter a different road into your life. But he promised that if you seek him, that he will make himself known. And I believe truly in that. Sometimes we want him to answer directly, and he doesn't always do that, and not always in the way we expect it. But there is this human wisdom added with the Holy Spirit wisdom, and that makes for me the cross always in the conversation. Always check with other people. What do you think?
I'm so glad you said that. When I counsel people on discernment and even how I would define it, or maybe it's someone that I'm in spiritual direction with, I do always encourage people to have people that they're discerning with. I think that's why I love the idea of praying for wisdom in community and as a group, because part of my discernment process has often been to come to people that I trust, that are wise and mature, and say, this is what I'm praying into. Let's commit to praying to it for, say, a month or even a week. And at the end of it, I'm going to come to you guys again, and I want to know what you're hearing. And if these people that I have asked to pray into this are all saying that is not what I heard, or it would be fantastic if I can tell you that I prayed with people and God gave them a direct message that they just handed over to me. It's usually been, there's something there, Brittany. There's just a check in our heart about this. We can't even tell you what, but like, we just really feel that you need to pause or to take more time. And to me, that, at least how I've experienced the most supernatural manifestation of wisdom. But of course, community discernment can also be tough because, especially when you have people close to you, was all your family in support of Bart going into some of these areas that were a little bit more dangerous? Or did you have anyone in your community that was like, gosh, this sounds really scary? Or was everybody just like, yes, we prayed about it and go for it?
Well, it's quite some years ago, so I try to remember. We found a church where one guy was really very much evangelist, and he saw our heart for mission. So he became our special supporter in this, but we couldn't talk about what was going to do. But we felt this is what it is, because I didn't tell the whole story. There were so many signs that we could not go to Albania yet, but that we had to do open doors first. There were 3 clear signs at that time that made us think, okay, then that's the next step. So there was no doubt for us. It was clear. It was clear. And for the next phase after 2004, Bart had other ideas than I did. I wanted to work with the debrief center because I know the value of debriefing people, but Bart didn't feel that he would be that kind of community person. So, and then we got this phone call from international teams if Bart wanted to become the director of Europe. And he said, well, actually, we've decided always to do things together. So if you take me, you get Mathilde as well, which was in the beginning a little bit hard because the man was more important. But he says, we are such a good team together. So that's it. That's what it is.
I think I can say it is a wise man who insists on doing things in partnership with his wife.
Yeah.
Clearly, yeah, I think even I can say that.
Funny, talking about wisdom. We came back to the Netherlands with 3 kids still moving in with us. So we needed a house for 5 of us. And that's hard. That's so hard. So we found a temporary place to rent. And after 2 years, we had to move out, but we didn't have anything else. So we were asking God, and then Bart saw this house on internet that was quite new at that time. And there's this little house in the back that he thought, oh, that's the office. But we are living on financial support. Which bank is going to give us a mortgage? That's no way. So we asked a friend who was working with the bank, and he said, can you go with us through our finances? And he ended saying, well, you would need about $50,000 in order to get this house and a mortgage. I thought, $50,000. Who's going to be on my doorstep with $50,000? We had a phone call. Somebody said, can we help? Yeah, please look in
Phone
all.
calls, Matilda. I've never
Yes,
got one of these phone
no.
calls.
I said, please look in advertisements and we need a house. He said, well, my wife and I were praying. They were not close friends, really not. He said, but we were praying and the Lord told us to give you $50,000. And Bart said, don't do it. And I go like, what? He said, don't give it to us. But if you make it a loan and we'll pay you back with the lowest rate of interest, then in a certain time you will have that money again and you can reuse it. And so that happened 3 times over. We've been able to help 3 more missionary couples with that amount that we have been able to pay back. And they ask us every time, do you have somebody else that needs this amount of money? And they did the same thing over again, which is, my husband is really the wise person in the family, really.
He was like, okay, be generous, but do it wisely, because in doing that, this will be something that we can continue to resource. That's incredible, and I think that it's hard because on one hand, it is my conviction that we do things in community, and that when we're praying for, say, wisdom, we're bringing other people into that conversation, then we get to be blessed by their discernment and the ways that God's talking to them. But in a way, some of these things that were more private conversations with you and your husband meant that you could see God show up in this really spectacular way, and that you're like, if I had have asked for that money, that would have been very different. But in keeping that conversation more private between the two of you guys, you got to kind of
Yeah.
experience, to me, which seems very supernatural. Like that's
And it
incredible.
was. And it gave us faith for our children when they came back from Albania. God has a house for you. We're pretty sure. I just called a mobile number on the window and said, is this house for rent? And they said, well, actually, my mother has just moved out. And I said, well, my daughter is coming back from Albania. So they talked to their mom, and this mom had prayed for Albania her whole life. And she said, this couple needs to have them. I don't know them. We should write a book, really. We should write a book.
Really should. Your children must have a very kingdom perspective of wisdom, and that maybe they've grown up thinking you have faith and you follow the call and God provides. Whereas for me, if I had have said, I moved, and I did, I actually really tried to move to Mexico, which was the mission that I had first experienced, because that's where I had countered Jesus, and I just thought, more of that, please. I'm going to move to Mexico, and my family said, hold on, that's a big decision, and of course, to have done that without saving, they would have thought would be very unwise. But now I'm thinking, your kids have grown up in a world where God provides, and so their view of wisdom must be influenced by that.
Well, I have to say the oldest, Joni, was 12 at that time when we left to Albania. So we've always talked with them that this was what we're going to do. And then Joni said, I trust God that if you are called by him and he put me in this family, that I'm also called by God. My second one, who became a stand-up comedian later on, said in her program, "My father says that he's called by God. I've never heard anything." And she jokes a little bit about it. So we'll see what God has in mind for my girls. I'm part of the prayer team, of course, in Life Springs. It's one of the beautiful things to talk about wisdom in the prayer team because it's so colorful wisdom. Everyone has a different perspective, but it makes it so beautiful. And to listen to it, wonderful.
Can you say more about that? How have you experienced different perspectives within prayer teams?
Well, it's the way that the different people in the group ask questions about a certain subject, questions that I have never thought about. I go like, "Oh wow, that's a beautiful entrance to think about this. Maybe I should pray in a different direction." And Terry is an absolutely fantastic leader in that. She is really encouraging us to be ourselves in the prayer team. It's beautiful.
That really stood out to me. Whenever I'm thinking about wisdom, I'm thinking about the answers that you have and the choices that you make. And if I think of someone who's very wise, I do tend to associate that with maturity or maybe someone who's not reactive but slow to make decisions, enter prayerfully. But always my thought is on the choice or the decision. I've never thought about defining wisdom as someone who asks really good questions.
Yeah.
But that, of course, that's where it
Yeah.
starts, right? Is the questions that we ask. I'm loving that right now, particularly as a spiritual director. Some of the things that I tell people when they have a big decision, and that's often something that we spend a lot of time with in direction, is what does God want me to do? What does God want me to do? And I often say, I think that God cares less about what you do than who you are becoming in all of this. And we ask, but how is this forming me? Is it forming me more towards the image of Christ or more towards the world? Those questions are often very different than the first question that we sat down with, right?
Yeah. I'm part of a house group now we're all 50 plus. And they've asked me for the first time to lead a Lectio Divina, which, of course, within Life Springs, Lectio Divina, we do that every time. So I choose the verse that everything is submitted under his feet. We might not see it yet, but we see Jesus. And it was the first tryout. They all had to, how do we do this? And we're going to do it for the next few weeks. And the very last minute before we ended, one person said, "Okay, but if you say, but we see Jesus, what do we see then exactly from Jesus?"
Such a fair question.
And it made me think, what do we see from Jesus? Which part? I thought, how interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Just as we kind of flesh out a little bit more of this prayer of wisdom, can you think of some times where you're praying in community where you think it mattered that we didn't just pray for the thing or for God to do the thing? It mattered that we spent time in prayer asking to pursue it wisely.
If I go on a very personal level, is that good?
I'll take that. Absolutely.
Sifra, that's my third daughter. She will turn 40 this year. They've been married for 17 years and they have no children. And when Sifra was born, she is named after the biblical midwife who was more obedient to God than to Pharaoh, and she got a family of her own. We've always felt from day one that it was a prophetic thing, naming her Sifra. We've been praying for a pregnancy for all these years. She got pregnant last year and had a miscarriage after 9 weeks. And we still pray. And she knows we still believe he can do it without claiming and flaming and faming, open hands. Every day we pray, Lord, you can do it. You can make it possible. So, yeah. And wisdom, God is God and I'm not. And that's what it is.
It's what it is. That's the best definition I think I've got in a while.
Yeah. But it brings a lot of questions like, what's happening, Lord?
Yeah. And supporting her with wisdom as a
Yes,
mom.
absolutely.
And it brings us full circle to what we were saying at the beginning. And our listeners won't have got to hear the conversation that I had with you a few days ago, and we were just kind of talking about this. But that so often in the story of women in the church, and certainly in North American context, we talk about how that is often focused on roles of mothers and wives. And there's problems that come with that. And the flip side of that, if we let the pendulum swim all the way, is to say women are also gifted missionaries, pastors, preachers, prophets. And we need to focus all on that. And then here you are telling us these stories of doing all of those things. You're blessed with children and you're caring for your kids while your husband is in places that you can't even tell your neighbors about. And you're loving your daughter now as an adult as she's going through something really hard and discerning how you do that wisely. And all of that can't really be reduced to one role of how we do mission as women and encourage and enable each other, because you've been in all of those roles at some point in your life, and sometimes in multiple, at the same time.
And I think especially these weeks, I'm still mother. We have a great relationship with all four of the girls. My youngest is 38. She has long COVID. So she's been tired and not working. And so I drive her from one hospital to another. It's been a little bit my mission these days to take care of my grown up kids, but that's fine. That's fine for a season.
Can you quickly, well, you and your husband are still involved in some mission organizations. Are you still involved in any close country missions?
No, we are retired. I'm 72. My husband is 70, but we keep saying we're still working as volunteers. We are mentoring a few couples from our own organization, a couple in Romania, a couple in Serbia. And then, with the war, we had 37 Ukrainians come to our place. And we've been taking care of them. And now most of them are back, but I'm involved in helping project wise to get stuff for them that they need, food and clothes and candles and you name it.
Don't
Which
sound
is,
very retired, which is
no,
why I had to ask the question. I'm like, she's going to tell me she's retired, but I know for a fact
no,
that that is a lie.
no. So Bart is more into the internet, the making all the files digital. We have had a lot of new missionaries because another mission organization in Latin America stopped. So we are all of a sudden in Mexico, Peru, Ecuador, Argentina. So Bart had a lot of work on that end.
Just do you guys speak? That's
I
just popped
speak
into my head.
Dutch, English, German, French, some Greek, some Albanian.
I gotta catch up.
One of my things that I did was anti-trafficking. So I was involved in all the teams that were working with men and women in prostitution in Ecuador, in Brussels. We worked with Albanian girls in prostitution in Bulgaria before. And now there's a retreat for people that have done those things or are doing those things. And I'm invited as a kind of honoring thing to come. We'll meet all the people that I've worked with over the last years, which will be fun.
You still have a lot of mentorship to offer. And you've been doing all this, obviously, like I said, while still caring for your family. And also, you had shared before that 17 years ago, you had a cancer diagnosis. You went into remission, and then recently found it again, but in quite a few places.
20 years ago, I had breast cancer. I had full surgery. Did a reconstruction surgery as well because I traveled so much and I just wanted to be a little more myself. But then 3 years ago, or almost 4 years ago, I had a hip surgery and I had to go through a scan, and that's where my bone metastases were discovered. So it was connected to my breast cancer, which I think I've had it so many years already, but it was never discovered. But today I was at the hospital again. I had a PET scan this week and everything is stable. And she said, I'm so glad to finally give somebody good news, which I can imagine that she has many sad news stories. But she said, I asked her, what is my prognosis? And she said, the hormonal treatment that you take is normally good for 2 years, but you are taking it almost 4 years now and you're still stable on it. I cannot promise that it will last. It might be different in half a year, but then I have another treatment that I can give you. We can try, but I cannot promise anything. But, I feel I'm not done yet. Yeah, I'm so pleased that I have a little more energy than I used to have over the last month. So that's good.
Did that even slow you down, Matilda? You had cancer in your spine and nope, in your hips. No,
No,
just kept on.
I was in Uganda last year for four
Yeah,
times for the school, Lifespring School of Ministry.
right.
S- But
When you told me that, I was so surprised because I know how active you've still been in Life Springs and with these other organizations that you partner with.
yeah, I'm a little more careful. I always listen to the oncologist. So when that retreat was in Uganda the last time, that was in the northern part, and there was no hospital in the neighborhood. So she would not agree with me going there. She found it difficult before that I would go to Uganda, but I said, there's a good hospital. I have friends there. There's a supporting church for me. That's fine. So I'm careful and I won't travel alone anymore. So Bart is coming with me this next 2 trips. And then, I'm
Well, I'm glad you
good.
said that because we talked about comparing earthly wisdom to godly wisdom, and sometimes we do things we feel that God has affirmed for us, and we've prayed with our communities as part of being wise. We've invited people into this, and they've prayed for it, and it still doesn't sound like the type of thing that maybe to someone who wasn't a follower of Jesus would make sense. And sometimes God just shows up in these really incredible ways, and we have faith, and part of that is wisdom. But what I'm hearing you say is having faith hasn't meant disregarding all of the opinion of your oncologist. That in that is still like, yeah, you are seeking medical treatment and you've had some incredible, miraculous even success with that, but that you're not just like, well, I'm just going to pray about it and get on the plane. And
No, no,
that
no.
there's been both. Part of it is I'm going to travel with my husband, I'm going to listen to my oncologist, but also you have not stopped. You're still still just like, listen, this is what God told me to do. I'll find a good
Don't,
hospital in Uganda, but I'm going.
yeah, don't set me on the couch and knitting. No, please. To be honest, I need to be wise. So I lay down every afternoon, just an hour to make sure that my neck is okay and my spine, and that's it. Other than that, I'm good, and I feel that my strength is coming back a little bit after my 2 hip surgeries. So that's good. That's good.
Well, anyone who's going to be listening to us can pray for Matilda, that she will
Yes.
continue to have that energy and that strength because she still has a lot to do and a lot of wisdom to impart to those of us who are just coming up behind her. I feel so far behind every time I talk to you. Um, Thank you for sharing your story, Matilda. I know that there is so much more. And there are even some things when we started, you said at 12, I decided, God told me I was going to be a missionary. I was thinking, I bet there's a whole story there, but we'll have to bring you on another time. I have one more question to wrap up, if you'll indulge me, a little bit easier. And that is, I've just been asking all the women that we've had on the podcast to share some of their influences right now. Who are
It
you
doesn't
reading? Who are
help
you paying
you.
attention to?
It doesn't. It doesn't help you. I'm reading a Dutch book by a Dutch author that nobody knows. So I'm reading, there's a guy in my church who he's a singer and a songwriter, and he just wrote a book on the verse, come to me if you're burdened and I'll give you rest. And it's all stories and people that have gone through those stories too, with a quote that you can listen to a song. And it has really blessed me because it's in line with the sermons in church. So that's what right now influencing me, but nobody will know. And I'm the only Dutch person in Live Springs. So that's kind of sad.
We'll have someone else in the Netherlands who we can still post that book, the title in the show notes, and who knows, maybe someone's going to find their next favorite book. Thank you so much, Mathilde. I really appreciate your time. I can't wait to hear more and for your book. Can you please write it so that we can hear the rest of that story? Yeah, and we'll be praying for you.
And thank you for inviting me. I feel really honored.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Bye for now.
Bye.